Hey everyone, welcome to Insert Game here. I am Brian.
And I'm Madison.
And I'm Jared.
And are we finished talking about this expansion pack yet?
No.
Because I feel like this is the third episode that we've spent on this very topic.
Apparently not. Apparently Insert Game here is the Switch Online expansion pack podcast.
Yeah, y'all are very opinionated about this.
Yeah, I mean, it's a topic that's gotten us just talking. Like, it's a topic that we're really intrigued by, and it's hard not to talk about it.
Well, Nintendo hit a new milestone yesterday as of the day of recording.
I was wondering if y'all were going to bring that up.
Well, we brought it up last time. I talked about how the trailer for the expansion pack had 61,000 dislikes. I think I led with that. It now has 143,000 dislikes and is officially the most disliked video on Nintendo's YouTube channel.
It now has more dislikes than the trailer for Metroid Prime Federation Force, which, if that doesn't tell you something, that should send a hint.
You know, I thought I knew how I was going to come into this podcast. I was going to be very level-headed and understanding, and hey, let's give Nintendo a chance. But in the last few days, I have played Ocarina of Time up to the Shadow Link battle. In fact, I did that live on Twitch, did a bit of a speed run, took me 6 hours to get there. I have also joined Addison here and another friend in playing some Mario Kart 64 online. Nintendo, I'm losing my patience. I'm trying. I am honestly trying to stay on your side. But I'm running out of options here. Man, you gotta help me.
Give me a reason to love you.
Let me love you again. It's just so hard to do right now. And honestly, I completely understand where Brian's coming from because I feel the exact same way. Like, I'm sorry, but at this point, I have looked at every avenue to try and find a reason to understand where Nintendo's coming from with this expansion pack. And I am running out of ways to be on their side with this. Like, this is bad. Like, we played Mario Kart 64 and yeah, it's really bad.
Give me some details, because I haven't had a chance to test it on my end, so we need some context for people that didn't get a chance to do that on their own, or they may not have the expansion.
While you're racing, you're gonna have some networking issues, and when those networking issues happen, you're gonna hear sounds like this.
The mental image that I'm picturing is it's kind of like whenever somebody has been driving automatic their entire life and then they are now put into a situation where they have to drive stick. And
Yeah.
it's just chunky.
And like, here's the thing is that since it is basically a ROM with online multiplayer incorporated into said ROM, it's not like they're porting this game over and they're adding an online mode to it. It's online multiplayer incorporated into the local multiplayer that was in the original game via the ROM. So the reason why that's a problem is it results in whenever there's a connectivity issue, it results in the entire game, and I mean the entire game, lagging. That means visuals, audio, everything.
Oh, are you telling me I can hear Toad scream in bass?
Yeah. I don't even know if I'd say that's accurate. It's something else. It's a nightmare. And the interesting thing is, the longer you play, the worse it gets.
Oh, so it falls apart at the seams. It's unraveling slowly.
It does. I will say, going back to Ocarina of Time actually plays really well.
Yeah, Ocarina of Time wasn't bad.
No, it's not bad at all. It plays magnificently. And I really, there's nothing really noticeable about Ocarina of Time on the surface until you get to that Shadow Link fight. And then the first thing that you think is, I don't remember the water looking like that.
Yeah. So it's funny because I was going to say the water thing that you're bringing up. I honestly thought, okay, like there were some screenshots online of people showing like, what the game used to look like on the N64. And you could see like the Switch Online thing in the corners. And I'm just like, okay, wait a minute. So the one with the terrible looking water has Japanese text on it. Maybe it's just the Japanese version. Maybe that's running into this problem. And then, no, you and I both confirmed because I was speedrunning through Ocarina of Time on the same day that you were. And we both ran into the water temple. And yeah, same problem on both ends. Like the reflections aren't there. The fog isn't there. There's like none of the effects that created the ambiance in that room is there.
It's actually really interesting to see, just from a creative standpoint, that ugly water that's there actually is responsible for creating the beautiful effect of the room once you lay the fog on top of it.
Right.
It's cool, but that isn't supposed to be seen like that. The other thing that's missing is the fact that when you step into that room, it's supposed to look like a never-ending horizon.
Yeah.
The fog gives this effect of this room never ends, and it's amazing, and it's awe-inspiring, and it's jaw-dropping. And without the fog, it's just like this room with an ugly water surface. And
I'm in a box with a leak.
yeah.
Yep.
So here's my thoughts on this. Because everybody, and here's where I'm going to side with Nintendo a little bit. Because everybody on the internet is just so ready to crucify Nintendo for making this change or for not being willing to fix it. Why would you do this? I'm not asking why would you do this. The question I'm asking is, what forced you in the corner to make you have to do this? Nintendo didn't want to do that. There's no way Nintendo wanted to do that. I want to know, this worked perfectly on the Wii U Virtual Console. For some reason, bringing this to the Switch broke it.
Right.
What happened that broke it?
I think the reason why people are upset, and this is understandable, is that Nintendo clearly didn't put enough effort into testing these ROMs and the emulator to make sure that everything was running the way that it was supposed to. Because I think what happened is just they just didn't realize that these issues existed. And it's not just the water temple either. Like I did notice in Kokiri Forest, and other people have brought this up too, there's like objects in the distance, like mainly like low resolution trees, low resolution even for the N64, off in the distance that in the original version, they were covered up by these thick fog effects. And it kind of created that illusion of like, oh, you're in a forest and there's more trees in the background. But the fog was there to kind of hide like the bad details. But now you can see those low resolution trees in full detail and they don't look good.
No, they don't.
It's like that song, I Can See Clearly Now.
Yep.
I can see clearly now, the fog is gone.
Oh.
Yep.
Oh. Can we get that back? The grass isn't always greener, I guess.
And it's not just in it's not just there either. Like when you get the Master Sword, and remember when you get the Master Sword, Ganondorf pops up and he's just like, "Hey, thanks for opening the door for me, kid. Now I'm gonna go get those triangles, and you're gonna go sleep for 7 years."
Yep.
You know, like in that cutscene, originally it's very ominous because he kind of comes into the cutscene from this really thick fog, and then in the end of the cutscene, he's like standing there laughing as he fades away into the fog as the camera zooms away from him.
Oh, and because the fog's not there, he just kind of like.
Well, no, it's not that.
Dang.
Like he doesn't pop out. As funny as that would be, what happens though is also kind of hysterical. Where instead of fading away in the fog, the camera just kind of zooms out and then stays still, and he's just kind of standing there laughing awkwardly as the white then fades in.
Yes.
Yeah,
It's really weird.
it is really weird.
But the only thing I can think of that would make it worse is if you eventually ended up T-posing.
Yeah, he just
I
T-poses
wouldn't
for
put
one
it past
frame.
him. I wouldn't put it past him.
T-pose and laugh.
But you know, I've given this a lot of thought, and I do agree with you, Addison, that Nintendo was not aware that so much was going to be wrong. I disagree that they didn't put forth the effort to try and fix it, because I think that they're under a time crunch. because we are into the last few years of the Switch's life cycle. There's not much time left. They are introducing a new service to the Switch at the end of the life cycle. And as we talked about, it is weird. And as we talked about last episode, I think there's going to be more they're going to add to this, which means they have a release schedule. And Nintendo had a couple of options when it came to addressing the issues with this emulator. We'll try to fix it. I'm sure they tried to do that and they ran out of time. They could either ship it as is, which assuming that, the fog was there and it was breaking it. So ship it as is and have it broken. Well, you can't do that. Remove the fog effects and everything else that was causing issues. Just to mention reflections, if you think fog will break a game, reflections will definitely break a game. Reflections are ridiculously hard to do in video games. Think back to any video game where you see a mirror. It's rare there's an actual reflection in that mirror. Reflections are difficult in video games.
It'll just be a flat texture that doesn't actually reflect.
So Nintendo could ship the game broken. They could ship the game with the fog and reflections removed, or they can just not ship it. And they chose to remove the things that was breaking it and then push it out there because they have a production schedule to keep. And this is just another instance where a production schedule, or at least in my opinion, I think this is what happened. A production schedule has gotten in the way with the quality of a final product.
Yeah, it's stable but lacking.
And hopefully they can fix it.
Yeah, and I think the reason why people are especially salty about this, though, is the fact that Nintendo is asking such a price point for it.
It makes that worse. It makes it so much worse.
Do you want us to pay all this extra money for something that's not working as intended?
Yeah, exactly. I feel like if this service was not as expensive as it is, people would not necessarily forgive it, but they would be like, yeah, it kind of sucks, but it's an inconvenience at worst. Hopefully they'll fix it down the line and it's not really, hurting me that bad. No, you're asking people to pay $50 for this. And that's where people are just like, wait a minute, you want us to pay how much for something that's not working?
Yeah. It's like going down to the donut shop, buying 12 dozen donuts, but each donut has a bite out of it.
Yep. I mean, that's not a bad analogy, to be perfectly honest. It makes sense.
So there's another issue plaguing this release that is honestly out of Nintendo's control. And it honestly has more to do with Nintendo saying, well, you asked for this, so we're going to give it to you.
Uh-oh. What did we ask for? I don't remember sending Nintendo a letter.
We asked for the N64 is what we asked for. If you think back to when we got the NES Online and the Super Nintendo Online, these are classic games that hold up really well. They stand the test of time. They're beautiful. Don't try and fix Super Mario World. It's perfect as is. Don't try and fix A Link to the Past. It's perfect as is. And you get to the N64, and you're hitting the awkward teen phase of video game history, where you've got a lot of potential, buddy, but you're ugly.
Yeah, actually, it's funny because it really goes to show just how much better we remember these games being than they actually are. As an example, when we were playing Mario Kart 64 online a few days ago, testing it out, we played for about 30 minutes. And even despite the connectivity issues, Brian and I just were like, after 30 minutes, we're just like, hey, do you want to just play Mario Kart 8?
The rose-tinted glasses have finally come off.
They have. You remember a couple of episodes ago, we said, oh, we're going to have some Mario Kart 64 streams. That's off the table, guys. We don't want to play that game.
Even if the connectivity was perfect and there were no issues, Mario Kart 64 just feels really empty compared to what we have now.
So empty.
Yeah. Well, that's because at the time period, it was one of the leaders of its genre. And now it's, 15, 20 plus years old?
Yep.
They've been able to innovate and improve upon it. And honestly, that's a good thing because that's how the industry stays healthy. But in terms of retroactively releasing content like this, some games aren't going to hold water like they used to.
Yeah.
It's true.
I look at, I feel like there's a few gems that are going to hold up really well on the N64. But a lot of these games, they're going to be empty. And I feel like if you're going to push a big service like this, I would have had more fun with Game Boy games than I'm having with the N64 games.
Yeah. I think the only reason they are trying to push N64 out as much as they are is because they know people have been screaming for N64 games for so long. And so they're trying to get them out, but they're also trying to rush them out.
And the N64 era, like, it was kind of one of the first big leaps into, 3D for video games, and it's definitely like a hallmark of the industry with like the PS1 and other stuff, just like that early era of games. But a lot of those are just like proof of concepts or experimental kinds of things. A lot of those ideas, like, they aren't fully fleshed out games like what we have whenever we get to like the GameCube and some of the other gens that follow. It's because they were still trying to figure it out. So these games are going to be rough around the edges, especially in terms of the programming. One of my favorite like examples for this is Final Fantasy 1. A lot of the spells just straight up did not work. Because they were still trying to figure out what they were doing. They were pioneering a game franchise or an idea, and things happen. And especially now that you're trying to bring these to updated devices like the Switch that have their own complex processing algorithms, and now you're trying to tell it to emulate something it wasn't initially designed for, there's going to be problems. And like what you were saying with the fog getting removed in Ocarina of Time.
Yeah, I was about to say, like, it honestly kind of reminds me of just how difficult N64 games in general have been to emulate in terms of like just the emulation community, because I know N64 has never been clean emulation. Even in the best emulators that are out there, it is very tricky to get them right.
It's always rough. Like, I remember the first time, because I didn't grow up with an N64, the first time I played Ocarina of Time was emulated. You know that area just outside the Temple of Time where there's those 4 little stones there and you have to walk around then go inside the temple?
Yeah.
I never saw what that screen looked like until the second time I played the game, because that screen would not load on the emulator I was on.
Yeah.
I had to kind of memorize the path around to get there to try and get into the temple blind. I was blind on that screen.
I remember another issue that you were running into with your emulator that you were using is on the equipment screen, Link was not loading correctly. It was just this jumbled texture mess.
I forgot about that.
Yep. And on top of that too, whenever you pause the game, like the original concept is that whenever you pause the game, the background freezes and the menu pops up. Well, whenever you pause the game in your emulator, the emulator couldn't get it right. So what did it do? It just replaced it with like a market background or something.
Yeah. And then moving over to Majora's Mask, the journal wouldn't even work on Majora's Mask. So it's one of the reasons why I never even finished Majora's Mask. And I'm anxious for Majora's Mask to come out. But now I'm a little apprehensive for Majora's Mask to come out. And it's kind of making me wonder, people are asking this question, why didn't you just give us all the games from the start? Maybe there's a reason why they haven't given us all the games yet. Maybe they're still trying to make things on Majora's Mask and make things on Banjo-Kazooie still work before they release them.
Yeah, because there may be like game like crashing bugs.
Yeah, that they're trying to figure out.
You think the N64 is hard to emulate? Try emulating Majora's Mask on the N64. That's like master mode right there.
Well, it's not even just that either. Like, because Majora's Mask is one of the few games that requires the expansion pack to work because it utilizes the extra memory that the expansion pack would incorporate into the Nintendo 64. And I'm talking about the Nintendo 64 expansion pack module. I'm not talking about the service.
You're saying we need an expansion pack for our expansion pack?
Sure. But what I was trying to say was any game that requires the Nintendo 64 expansion pack plugin for the console.
RAM expansion.
Any game that required that RAM expansion is really terrible in emulation in a lot of cases. Is very hard to get right.
And this is what happens whenever you take a precision engine that requires precision fuel, and then you have to then try and put it in a different brand of car.
Yeah.
It wasn't designed initially to do this. It's like whenever you have to emulate stuff like what they're doing on the Switch with these games, essentially it's like taking a foreign language and then you have to retranslate it through Google Translate and then hope that the message is still there on the other end.
Yeah.
And that's what emulation is doing. It's taking the N64 code, running it through the N64, which is then being emulated on the Switch, which has its own algorithms, and it just doesn't always work.
It kind of shows that N64 games are a product of their time, and emulation just kind of goes to show that, despite Majora's Mask being my favorite game of all time, it's a game that I have a hard time recommending to newcomers. Like I've had friends approach me saying, "Hey, Addison, you're the Zelda nerd, and I'm interested in playing Breath of the Wild, but I want to catch up on the Zelda series before I play it. Are there any specific games you recommend? Should I play Ocarina of Time? I've heard a lot about it." I'm just like, just play Breath of the Wild.
Oh yeah.
Just play. He's like, "But isn't Majora's Mask your favorite game of all time?" I'm like, "Yes, it is. But it's old."
Yeah.
And
Yeah, it is.
You are not prepared.
it basically, exactly. Like, if someone says like, "Should I play Majora's Mask?" I'm just like, you can if you want, but just remember that you're playing a game from the late 90s on an N64 using extremely outdated technology and controls. AKA, you may not enjoy it as much as I do. Just an FYI.
But here's one of the beautiful things about Ocarina of Time, and by extension, Majora's Mask. I look at the PlayStation, and the PlayStation has, it's in the same generation as the N64. The graphics don't always stand up, but I've always looked at Final Fantasy IX as one of the greatest games of the PlayStation era, one of the most beautiful games, because they worked that hardware to the max, and they created something beautiful on a system that did not have as much beauty. And I feel like the Zelda games on the N64 kind of have that same thing. Like look what they did with the fog and the reflection and all that. They found ways to cover up the rough edges to make some truly beautiful areas and make a game on a console that generally looks really angular and meh, turn out something that looks quite beautiful. And that is why this release on the Switch is hurting so bad, because that beauty is gone. And now we're seeing it just like every other N64 game. It's ugly, guys.
Yeah, it's the Wizard of Oz. We're seeing the man behind the curtain now, and we don't like the man behind the curtain.
Exactly. It's so fascinating how so many people want, they're saying, "Why hasn't GoldenEye come out for the service yet? I want that." I'm just like, have you played GoldenEye recently? It's that's my go-to game for the N64 of this game is terrible. Yeah.
Because
but everybody played it.
And I remember whenever I was a kid, I loved it. But now if I go back and I'm just like, I only have one joystick to try and aim. Oh, this is terrible.
Yeah, and GoldenEye is a game that has it's fondly remembered, but it is not aged well in any way.
Mm-hmm. I did have a question I wanted to pose to y'all. Do you think it's fair to compare the SNES or Super Nintendo to the N64?
No.
Personally, I don't think it's fair.
It is totally not fair. The Super Nintendo was the last great console of the 2D generation. It was near perfection for what it was. And the N64, it is the beginning of that 3D generation. It was rough. It was, like you were saying earlier, it was new technology. And there were some fun, exciting things happening there, but we were just starting to understand how to make 3D games. They're two very different beasts.
Part of the wow factor was the fact that this hadn't been done before in this scale.
Yeah,
exactly.
It's actually very similar to like what I talk about sometimes with people about film. the Lumiere brothers, who invented like one of the first film cameras, they just filmed real life, and people paid money to see it because nobody had ever recorded footage that way before. However, that novelty fell off quickly because eventually the technology is just kind of like, oh, okay, well, I mean, this is all it does, until we started adding narrative and storytelling and other things for it for film and video. The technology can only get you so far, and unfortunately that's where the N64 kind of dwells. Is it was a novelty, but it wasn't optimized for its element because it was still the baby steps. And in that regard, I guess the more accurate comparison would be to compare the N64 to the Atari 2600.
I was actually going to say the exact same thing. Because if you really think about it, the Atari 2600 was the baby steps that was leading into the 2D generation, and the Super Nintendo was when that formula was perfected. And the N64 is the equivalent of the Atari 2600, as Jared himself just said. I was going to say the exact same thing. You beat me to it.
But it's funny. You were talking about how the N64 was so different, yet now we look at it and it's so ugly. I just got this memory of being in a store. I can't remember which store it was, but the N64 was there. And it was showing Zelda on there. And my mom was the one that got me into Zelda. The NES was hers. And she bought Zelda to play herself. And I remember being a kid watching her play Zelda and then playing it myself. And I remember being in the store and saying, "Hey, Mom, look, there's the new Zelda game." And she took one look and she was like, "That's ugly." And that was the end of her Zelda journey.
That is hilarious. That is hilarious. But I mean, yeah, if you're someone who's never played Ocarina of Time or Majora's Mask before, especially now, if you were to look at those games and it's the first time you've seen them, yeah, you're gonna look at them and go, yeah, that ugly. It doesn't look good. Like, yeah, it was revolutionary for its time.
Yeah. Also, I feel like kids are a lot more forgiving in terms of graphical quality.
Pong was amazing.
Yeah.
In its day.
Pac-Man was a hit.
Donkey Kong.
Yeah. It's just that suspension of belief, it's just they're more willing to buy into it and use their imagination to fill in the gaps. And I don't want to say that magic is lost, but it's definitely a lot more hit and miss than what it kind of was whenever at least I think we were kids.
I still feel like that, despite the fact that N64 games, we look at them now and, they obviously have aged very, very poorly, but there's still history. Mm-hmm. And these are still games that people out there care about. I mean, I'm part of that audience too. The N64 is my favorite console ever. And, Majora's Mask is my favorite game ever. These are pieces of history, pieces of our childhood that people care about and they want to see preserved. So I can totally understand why people look back at these experiences fondly, despite the fact that you play them now and they're kind of aged poorly. And so to that end, I do agree that these are games that should be preserved and should be available for people to play. But I feel like Nintendo's not doing a good enough job preserving them. I think they're doing the right thing by preserving them and making them available. It's just, there's definitely a lot of problems that need to be ironed out. And a lot of those problems are outside their control. I get that. But, at that point, you need to be a little bit more reasonable and more consumer friendly with how you make them available.
That was honestly the question I did want to ask. Were these ports handled by Nintendo in-house themselves, or did they outsource it?
They outsourced it.
That might be a big part of it too.
Yeah. And to a degree though, like I get it. I get why Nintendo outsourced it, because here's the thing. Nintendo, yes, they're $1 billion company. They're worth, I think, something like $55 billion. But despite the fact that they're a big $1 billion corporation, they still have a limited amount of resources available to them to do the things that they want to do. Like they have to say, all right, how many new games are we going to work on? And how many older games are we going to work on? Like they still have to manage their resources and their finances and decide where their resources are going to go and what are they going to outsource to get more done. And to me, I think just preserving these emulations, making them available on a service like this, to them is important, but it's not as big of a priority to them, at least not anymore, as trying to say get Breath of the Wild 2 developed and released.
Right.
You know, so like Breath of the Wild 2 obviously is something they're going to handle in-house because that's a big deal for them. That's a major release.
Yeah, they have to keep innovating to survive in the industry.
And I was actually about to say as well, like it's funny how there's a big outcry for Nintendo to release these old games. When you actually look back at the Wii U, and the Wii U was a console that, if you really think about it, didn't have a lot of new releases at all. Like it had some, but Nintendo obviously had a much bigger emphasis with the Wii U generation on preserving their older games. They had a very large focus on the virtual console, releasing, you know, SNES and N64 games and stuff like that. Heck, they even had Game Boy Advance games on the Wii U virtual console that you could download and play on your TV. So that was a big deal for them back then. But the problem is they relied so heavily on their older games that it took resources away from them developing newer games. And so we didn't really see, at least that's my theory, but like I believe that's why we didn't see a lot of newer releases come out in the Wii U.
It makes a lot of sense though, because I feel like the Wii and Wii U, like the architecture for the software was specifically designed with that in mind. Whereas for the Switch, it feels a little bit more like an afterthought because this wasn't rolled out until much later in the Switch's lifespan.
Yeah, and I was about to say, I think what happened was with the Switch, Nintendo switched gears and they said, hey, let's focus more on newer releases in these franchises and coming up with new ideas rather than just relying on nostalgia.
Right. And that's the thing that I feel like is a big part of why they decided to outsource it is a lot of their staff and personnel isn't specialists in essentially remastering or doctoring older video games. A lot of their stuff, all of their staff would be focused on, 3D artists and modelers and animators and stuff for the current generation of console. So they wouldn't have the people specialized in-house to do something like this. And honestly, this was actually a question I wanted to pose to y'all because I thought of this a little while ago. Do you think that the N64 was the appropriate generation of console to roll out? Or do you think something like the GameCube would have been a better choice?
I'm going to say I'm mixed on that question because on one hand, I feel like GameCube that's a platform that feels like it got past the awkward teen phase that was the N64. And it started taking a lot of what the N64 was doing and better perfecting on a lot of its ideas. And so on that end, I mean, if they started releasing GameCube games through this service on the Switch, like those I feel like would have aged a lot better. But the problem is that between the N64 and GameCube, the N64 is the one that more people have nostalgia for. Like there's more notable titles with the N64 than there is with the GameCube. Like the GameCube has a lot of notable titles, don't get me wrong, but it doesn't have like that Ocarina of Time equivalent. It doesn't have that Super Mario 64 equivalent. Like, yeah, it's got a mainline Mario game in the form of Sunshine, but it wasn't as big of a deal as Mario 64. Yeah, it's got that big Zelda game in the form of Wind Waker that a lot of people like, but Ocarina of Time was a much bigger deal. I think just in general, like GameCube is one of those platforms that people look back at fondly as well. Like the GameCube was a great system. I love the GameCube, but the N64 is definitely one that I guess you could say is more marketable than the GameCube.
I can understand that.
I do think the GameCube would have been a better choice in many regards for the reasons that Addison's already said. But there's two things to consider with the N64. One, it was the next chronologically. And they've been releasing these systems in chronological order. But another big one, and this is the reason why I've always said GameCube will never come out on the on Switch Online, is your N64 games would take up at most 64 megabytes of space. GameCube discs were 1.5 gigabytes. That's a huge leap in size. And if you're releasing, 10 GameCube games on this service, that's 15 gigabytes of information right there.
Yeah.
Another thing that kind of pops into my mind about GameCube too is that while the GameCube was an awesome system that had some great games, the number of games that it had, like I said, are kind of small, like the notable ones. So honestly, at that point, I just kind of say that I feel like it would be better to just take the notable games and remaster them.
And I think that's what we're going to end up seeing. The GameCube's going to kind of be that line where rather than release it as a bundle, we're just going to re-release these games one at a time.
Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah.
So my gut instinct for some reason was telling me that the GameCube games were a little bit more polished in terms of like the programming and architecture, that they would port a little bit cleaner. But definitely there is a lot of notoriety for the N64 that I understand why they made this decision. I just feel like in terms of like quality of product, it would have been simpler for the GameCube games to get brought over.
Now, having said all of that, and I know I just said they're probably never going to release the GameCube games as part of the Switch Online, we're paying $50 or $80 for this service. They've got to start offering something bigger. And GameCube is certainly something bigger they can offer.
Yep. The only other thing that I can think of that they could do to make the service more appealing, other than just bringing something like GameCube or Game Boy, is they do more of the Animal Crossing DLC thing where they start, like when Splatoon 3 comes out, they announce, hey, we got DLC up in line for Splatoon 3. And if you're an expansion pack subscriber, you get the DLC free of charge with your subscription. Like if they do stuff like that, maybe include some games with it. Maybe they come out and say, hey, own a Switch and you haven't played Breath of the Wild for whatever reason. Well, now you can if you have the expansion pack. You know,
there are a number of things they could add. Give us the Breath of the Wild DLC. Include that. Give us the Sega Saturn, the PS1.
I don't see the Sega Saturn. Like I see a lot of people saying Sega Saturn and Dreamcast as options, but they're not marketable. They're never going to do that. I feel anyway.
I don't know. I mean, if Sega's already playing ball, they don't have their own system to put those kinds of things on. It may actually be a little bit of fringe money that they could get.
When it comes to Sega's last systems, you got the Sega Saturn and the Sega Dreamcast. These are systems that people never got to play. N64 is all about nostalgia. If you give us the Saturn and the Dreamcast, this is going to be all about checking out these games you never got a chance to really play. I would love to play Sonic Adventures. I'm not a fan of the 3D Sonic games, but I would love to check out Sonic Adventures because I never owned a Dreamcast.
Oh yeah, I'm definitely not saying I'm against Saturn and Dreamcast games being on the expansion pack. If they announced that those was coming, I would be all on board for it, and I would actually be kind of excited to check them out. I'm just saying, like from a marketing standpoint, I just don't see them doing it.
Yeah, I think they would bundle it in with another thing like they did with the Genesis and the N64.
Either that or like Sega might at some point come out with like a Dreamcast collection for standalone release.
Another thing I'd love to see them do is to work with Square Enix to license the original Final Fantasy games and Chrono Trigger to release on the service. Because those are games I want to play. I really want to play Chrono Trigger on my Switch. I know they're on Steam. I want them on my Switch.
I have to agree with Brian. The fact that the 2D Final Fantasy games are not on the Switch is a glaring omission. I don't understand why I can't play Final Fantasy VI on my Switch.
I honestly wonder if it's they had a contractual like limitation that they could only distribute them like for a set period of time on X platforms, and that's why it hasn't been done yet.
I don't know, but I'm still upset with Square Enix for coming out and being like, we're announcing a big 2D Final Fantasy collection 1 through 6. It's coming out on mobile and PC.
Yeah, I was jumping up and down when they announced that. I was like, this is what I've been asking for. This is what where's the Switch? I know there's got to be a Switch logo somewhere there. It's not there.
It's not even just the Switch. Like, okay, you have this big collection of Final Fantasy 2D games coming out. Why mobile and PC? Why, people want these on consoles. If you're not going to put them on the Switch, at least put them on PlayStation.
Yeah.
Like, it doesn't make sense.
Yeah. It's like whenever I got jerked in the opposite direction at that announcement, I audibly Charlie Brown screamed.
And I want Tactics too. That's one of my favorite PlayStation games is Tactics.
And that's the thing. Like, I've never played Tactics before, but I really want to play it, and I want Square Enix to give me an excuse to play it.
Yep. Anyway, let's end this podcast on a bit of a brighter note.
Yeah, because I know there was a game that you wanted to talk about.
There's actually a couple games that I want to talk about right now. One of them I'm just going to kind of throw on you guys right now because Nintendo and Niantic have decided that people aren't walking in Pokemon Go anymore. And so we need to get people walking again. Enter Pikmin Bloom.
What?
What?
Yes.
I have not heard of this, actually.
It is a new Pikmin game that you play on your phone, and it's basically a step counter. Reading from the website, grow your Pikmin, make flowers bloom, and keep track of your most precious memories, all through the simple act of walking.
What? Okay.
All right, I'm looking this up now. I have to know.
What is it called? Pikmin what?
Bloom. Bloom.
Oh, yeah. It was just put out.
Oh, yeah. Like this just dropped yesterday.
What?
I had no idea that this was even happening. Did they just announce this or something?
They dropped a trailer for it yesterday morning.
As soon as you mentioned this, my brain immediately went to me yeeting my phone at a bulborb and then just decking someone in the face.
That is amazing, though. Like I have to say, the idea is creative. I have to give them that. I might download and check it out. I am not a mobile gamer in any way. I don't play mobile games at all, but I might check it out and see what it's like.
I play Pokemon Go on and off, and I do enjoy it. It does make getting out and walking, especially in the summer, a little bit more enjoyable. But I didn't know we needed another one.
I've completely fallen off of Pokemon Go primarily because getting Pokeballs is a complete pain. For me anyway, because like there's no Pokestops where I am. Mm-hmm. Like there's no Pokestops anywhere, and the places that I typically drive to, there's not really Pokestops. Like I don't know what it is about the area that I'm in. Like there's just no Pokestops here.
You live in the middle of nowhere.
just about.
Say hi to Muriel for me.
Muriel, where's my dinner?
But yeah, this one surprised me. I wasn't expecting this, and yeah, I'll be interested in seeing what it does and how well it does.
Like I'm more curious about what is this? And I'm definitely not going to stick around, despite how much I love the Pikmin franchise. But like, this gets into the concept of like, why do we play video games? And whenever I think of video games, I think of leisure and entertainment. Mm-hmm. That's what it is for me, at least. I know there's some people like there's competitive gamers and other things like that, but it's just like, for me, it's a leisure activity. I don't want to play a video game and link that with the idea of exercise.
You want to play a video game to like kind of like take the edge off. Like you want to be able to relax.
Yeah, I'm trying to wind down, and it's just like I can definitely understand making exercise fun can definitely work for some people. Whenever I was younger, absolutely. Things like the Wii, where like you were having to waggle these Wii remotes to get swing a sword and stuff. Like I was unintentionally I was exhausted after a game session. Like I would be playing for a while and I'd be swinging the sword and stuff because I would get into it.
Yep. I completely understand.
But Pokemon Go, like I enjoy the social aspect of Pokemon Go. I would back before I was married, I would go with my sister in the summer. We would go out every morning and we would walk the park and play Pokemon Go. And then, we would trade Pokemon or we would do things. And then when Community Day would hit, we would go out and we would meet new people at the park. And, Community Day was always like a big festival at the park where you had a ton of Pokemon lovers there and everyone was getting together to battle this gym. And it was fun. It's a social thing. But whenever I've ever tried to go out and play Pokemon Go by myself, 5 minutes in, I end up sticking my phone in my pocket because I just want to enjoy the nature. I just want to enjoy my walk and be in the moment and enjoy nature. And Pokemon works for this because it has that social aspect attached to it. I don't know what Pikmin can do to replicate that and to get you working with other people.
And the thing is, I think it's a more solitary experience.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking as well. It's not meant to be social. It's more just for your own personal health.
It's more focused on the exercise element rather than like what you were saying. There was the social element and then kind of that element of discovery. Because like whenever I first started playing Pokemon Go, I was like, oh, I wonder what the hell's on the radar. I don't even know. I just know it's nearby. I need to find it.
Yeah.
It was like a treasure hunt, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can't tell you how many times like I need to go to Walmart and I'd be like, hey, Lee, you want to go with me? We'll pogo on the way home. It's like, yeah, great. And so like on the way home, we would take the long way just to and watching the map saying, there's something in that church there. Let's pull it. It was fun. And I just don't see that happening with this one.
Right.
There is one more game I do want to talk about, and this is ConcernedApe's new title. If you don't know who ConcernedApe is, they are the developer behind Stardew Valley. It's actually one guy who made that entire game. And he has this new game called Haunted Chocolatier. And honestly, it looks extremely delightful.
Yeah, because the trailer that you sent us has like that aesthetic of Stardew Valley. So it's got that charm, that nice pixel art kind of environment. But then like, I don't know if there was like existential terror or something that was added into the mix.
Well, it looks like they're using the same engine. He's definitely reusing a lot of the assets, but that's okay. It worked very well in Stardew. It's very recognizable. And instead of being in a small town on a farm, it looks like you're more in the city a lot of times and you're making chocolates with ghosts. And I love the fact that he's getting really creative and making something entirely new, but yet it feels so familiar.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It is interesting. The idea of like, oh, you're running like a chocolate shop or factory. It's definitely not an idea that I've ever heard of in a video game before. I'm interested.
I'm more interested in the clientele that he's choosing of making chocolates with ghosts.
That is an interesting idea.
Because that implies that you are making confectionery treats for dead people.
Yeah.
Well, yes, it does.
And it kind of brings to the table like, oh, well, what's the story here?
Yeah, it juxtaposes the subtle charms and lighthearted attitude that you associate with like Stardew Valley. So I'm wondering if this might be a slight dabble into like the horror genre a little bit, but it'll probably be more lighthearted. But there's also a lot of like dark turns it could potentially take.
Yeah.
I mean, it looks to me like it's going to be a fairly lighthearted kind of horror. It's not going to be trying to really creep you out of your pants or anything like that. But then again, who knows? I've seen a lot of very lighthearted games that take a really dark and twisted turn before, so this one might not, be an exception either.
Well, I'm definitely excited to see what they do with it. He's just come out with this out of nowhere, dropped a teaser trailer. He said, after dedicating 10 years of my life to Stardew Valley and counting, the time has finally come to announce my next game. So yeah, 10 years on one game, I would say it's time to start a new one. So he hasn't even talked about a release date. He's just launched a new blog for this new game, and I'm going to be watching it, and I'm going to be interested in see how this game comes out, because Stardew's fun, and I've actually just started streaming it with a couple of friends on my channel, a multiplayer game, because I've not played the multiplayer yet. So I've been having fun with Stardew. I'm looking forward to see what they do with Haunted Chocolatier.
Yeah, I also wanted to comment, like, I do like how, he announced the game, but he's not saying anything about the release date, probably because, he wants to give the game plenty of time to develop. And I do like when indie developers do that. Like there's this game that I've been somewhat following called Oddity, which is Oddity is actually the game that used to be the fan-made Mother 4 game. But they transitioned it into its own original game called Oddity. Mm-hmm. And at the end of the trailer, it literally says, it'll come out when it's ready. Relax. And I'm just like, yeah, I'm fine with that. Good on you for just, making sure the game gets plenty of time in the oven.
Yeah, because we talked about this before today. One of the things that kills the game faster than anything is rushing it out. That's what happened to Sonic 06, that's what happened to the famed E.T. game on the Atari. They were rushed.
Honestly, this quote is brought up all the time, but I'm going to bring it up here. Mr. Miyamoto once said, a delayed game is eventually good, but a rushed game is always bad.
Yep.
Yeah.
That quote is brought up all the time. Everybody knows it. And I know some people are probably tired of hearing it, but it's true. It's absolutely true. Which it's ironic that comes from somebody who works at Nintendo, and Nintendo rushed out this service, but we're past that now.
Oh, they rushed a third-party developer to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true.
But anyway.
They don't rush their own stuff, but everybody else, they'll give them the runaround.
Well, thank you guys so much for joining us for this podcast today. We are on Twitter. You can find us there at InsertGameCast. And you can also find us on YouTube. And hopefully on the next episode, we are not still talking about the Switch Online expansion pack.
Depends on if Nintendo gives us another segue.
Yeah, watch. Within the next week, they're going to be like, hey, we're coming out with GameCube games. And we're just like, dang it, now we got to talk about it again.
Sonic 06 is a treasure, and you will darn well remember it.
Dang right.
It's like whenever they first rolled out VR. It's an experience. It's not a game.
Yeah. Please no. Please no.